The ANC Billionaires, Big Capital's Gambit and the Rise of the Few is the latest offering from News 24's assistant editor, journalist and author Pieter Du Toit. His best-selling Stellenbosch Mafia raised a debate about Afrikaner legacy capital and its influence politically and on the economy of the country. This new book draws out the circumstances that gave rise to a new post-Apartheid class of billionaires. Pieter, as a colleague as well, lovely to have you with us in the Full View studio.
Thanks, Iman. Great being with you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your latest offering.
Thank you.
So, part of the reason you decided to write this book is, your fascination with how things work.
Yes.
The influences that are brought to bear that may not be immediately visible to, ordinary people in society. We're going to get into the meat of the interview in just a moment, but tell us about the timing. Why this book? Why now?
Look, it's obviously a follow-up to the Stellenbosch Mafia, and in your introduction you spoke about you referenced the rise of Afrikaner capital, which was certainly a political project, and wealth, the economic class, the economic ruling class, worked very closely with the political ruling class, whether that was before 1994 or post 1994. So the rise of a new class of ANC billionaires and connected ANC wealthy business people was also part of a political project post 1994, and I find it fascinating how the comparisons between pre-94 and post-94 looks.
And there are two significant historical events that precede these two, we'd call them sort of eras,
yes,
in South Africa's consciousness and history. So two critically influential elites that have been molding and shaping our country on the political and the economic front: the post-Anglo-Boer War and the rise of the Afrikaner wealthy, and then the post-Apartheid period and the 1994 moment which birthed the ANC's billionaires. Sketch for us a brief history of these two significant moments and why it was that they were able to wield such political and economic influence.
So post the South African War, the Anglo-Boer War, Afrikaners were completely disempowered after the war. Obviously, they had no significant ownership of the economy, and the country was dominated by the English, by the British. We were still very much a British colony, and with the rise of Afrikaner nationalism as a political project, the rise of apartheid as an ideology, there was a feeling that Afrikaners had to obtain a bigger chunk of control of the South African economy, and it became part of a political project. The rise of Afrikaner capital was very much an Afrikaner nationalist project, part of the rise of apartheid, part of the rise of the National Party, and during the era between the 1930s and 1994, Afrikaner capital moved very close to the political ruling class. Fast forward from 1938, 39, 48 to 1994 or the mid-1980s, you saw big capital seeing that political change was coming. They saw that something was afoot, there was something on the horizon, and in the book I argue that I think that big capital in the mid-1980s, early 1990s could see a little bit farther than the politicians could. P.W. Botha was the apartheid president. He refused to engage with the ANC during that period, and Anglo-American and various other big capital organizations took the lead in trying to engage with the ANC.
And that's the moment I want to come to, this 1985 moment, which becomes such an important triggering moment for the way that things would unfold in our economy and within our political complex later. Anglo-American visits the exiled ANC in Lusaka. There's a lot happening, as you say, in South Africa, this cocktail of a state of emergency, the intransigence of President P.W. Botha at that time. And the biggest investors say, hey, we just want to deal with the ANC directly, because we can see, as you say, beyond this curve that there is a deep change going to come. What was the outcome of that? And I want you to draw the foundational threads between what happened there and what comes, as you write in your book later, in places like 1995 and beyond.
So 1985, Iman, was a significant year. I mean, it was the year in which Oliver Tambo and the ANC announced they're going to make the country ungovernable. It was the year of P.W. Botha's Rubicon speech, which turned out to be not the Rubicon speech. Banks started calling in the country's foreign loans. The country was racked by violence, and business said we need to start taking a lead. So they went to go and visit the ANC, and the foundational threads were that big business, big capital in that period between 1985 and 1990 certainly started engaging with the mass democratic movement internally in the country. And I also argue that I think that businessmen, big business, big capital, even small, medium-sized enterprises enterprises were much more in tune with the coming changes than the politicians were, because they worked on the shop floor with their employees who were black. Anglo-American worked with their miners on the mines, so they saw there was a change coming. There was a groundswell of resistance. So I think they were a little bit more attuned to what was coming. And then post-1990, certainly when the ANC returned, they used their ample resources to try and persuade, influence, cajole the ANC to move away from socialism, to move away from the Freedom Charter, and to embrace a free market system.
So many interesting characters start to emerge in these foundational years, and you know, we don't have the luxury of time to go to all of them, and of course we want people to buy your book and to read your research for themselves. But it's interesting how when you speak about big business, it is not business speaking with a unified voice, nor do they have exactly the same ambitions and strategic aspirations. So tease out the power blocks that existed then in terms of business and how it created this preservation of their interest.
Iman, I think the one thing that I think we tend to forget as South Africans is the context of that period. You know, we're so frustrated with a misfiring government, with an ANC government or a governing party so involved in their own internecine battles. You know, in Joburg we're struggling with water and electricity, all the rest of it. And we forget that the options open to the ANC, the National Party government, business, were very few. So the context of back then was that the JSE, 86% of the JSE was controlled by 5 conglomerates. Anglo-American, Sanlam, Rembrandt, who belonged to the Ruperts, Liberty and Anglo-Val. So they were much more they acted much more in unison before 94 than post 94. So when Oppenheimer and Rupert, for example, agreed on certain things, and someone like Mike Rosholt from Barlow World, you know, they could get business to operate with one voice and one approach. After 1994, when it was every man for himself, when empowerment became such a big thing, when there was a drive to create a new black middle class and certainly a black wealthy class, you know, businesses started fragmenting, and it was everyone for himself.
And I wish we had, again, more time just to, again, excavate those businesses and their particular, you know, allyship to certain individuals and how their interests become manifest in South Africa. But a lot of money changed hands, no doubt. And if we look at the cover of your book, you've got the pictures of Tokyo Sexwale, Saki Matlozoma, Patrice Motsepe, and, of course, the president. But without giving too much away, and only since he is one of the biggest topics right now, the piece you write about Cyril Ramaphosa, the new Rand Lord, is about Cyril Ramaphosa. And it makes for this neat thread between the activities of Anglo-American in 1985 and then in 1995, where a combination of Ramaphosa's experience in the labor movement, his own well-documented political ambitions, make him poised for an opportunity that was to come during the unbundling of JCI.
And he took that opportunity. I mean, in 1996, when he was coming to the end of his role as the chairperson of the Constituent Assembly that wrote the final constitution, you know, he was elbowed out of the ANC leadership by Thabo Mbeki. He was outmaneuvered, and he was looking for something else. And the gap that he saw was going into business. You know, Anglo-American and other companies were looking for partners. They were trying to cherry pick certain individuals to draw them out and to make them part of the ruling economic elite. And Cyril was certainly one of the biggest beneficiaries of that.
There's a quote by Jeremy Cronin, you know, big capital won the day in the transition. What we needed to do was to discipline it. And I mean, it's a simple sentence. It's part of a bigger conversation that you write about in the book. But it's really, really powerful in accepting that certain power blocks and interests are almost a fait accompli in any environment, whether it's in apartheid or out of apartheid, it's always going to be there. How do you ride the horse and not it ride you? It's
difficult because you've got, this was an elite pact. It was an elite pact between the political ruling class at the time, and the incoming political ruling class, which was the ANC, and also the elite economic ruling class, which was represented by big capital and others. So there was an agreement, there was a pact. You know, big businesses wanted to continue operating in this country, despite all the problems problems that there were. And the incoming government, of course, needed a functioning economy to try and implement the changes that it wanted. So they needed each other. And in order to strike that compromise, there was a lot of give and take. There was a lot of things that people like Jeremy Cronin, Jay Naidu, individuals on the left of the ANC wanted more social spending. They wanted to break up these conglomerates. And obviously the conglomerates resisted a lot of that. And for Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Trevor Manuel, they had to ride that horse, like you say. But they rode the horse, I argue in the book, because of the very few options that were open to them at the stage.
So that's what I want to end on. But before I do, these monikers are so interesting. So for the Cyril, you've got the new landlord. I think for Patrice Motsepe, it's the suitcase man. We won't talk too much about that. And it's interesting because you end your sentence in the book talking about him as him being enigmatic, or him being an enigma.
Yes.
A man who doesn't really play politically, but you can see through his patronage of various political parties, mostly the ANC in the beginning, and spreading that out to some of the opposition parties later, that he is incredibly strategic about making those opportunities work. I want to come to these benefits, big and small, that you touched on right now. Some of them are big and small, some of them are symbolic, some of them are significant, as you write in the book. Mandela, Mbeki and others given accommodation or homes by Anglo.
Yeah.
You refer to this as a murky period, and I think the question a lot of South Africans might ask is, can these transitional periods always be so cut and dried, or is there going to be some nebulous sort of toxic stuff at play that you have to measure against the context of the time, as opposed to measuring it through a strict lens of betrayal?
I think you're right. I mean, that's exactly it. We need to judge or consider, not judge. We need to consider what happened in the period between 1990 and 96, when GEAR was adopted as our macroeconomic policy, through the prism of the time. When the ANC took over government, and Trevor Manuel very eloquently explained to me what he found on day one at the Department of Trade and Industry when he was minister, was a bankrupt state. A state that was eschewed by international finance institutions.
A pariah state.
A pariah state. The tax base was small. The spend on a small section of the population was enormous compared to the largest section of the population. So a lot of things had to be corrected during that time. But also, not only did government have to realign itself, the need to create a black middle class, to give black people a stake in the economy, was enormously important. A lot of mistakes were made. Mistakes were made around empowerment. I think mistakes were made around identifying certain individuals to draw them out. But in that period where the country was on the precipice of a civil war, remember the murder of Chris Hani, we were on the verge of a bloody revolution. So a decision had to be made in a very short period of time with very limited options, and an economy that was in a cash crunch. So I think when we consider events from that period, we need to look at it in the context of the time. Mistakes were made, certainly, but I think we were able to prevent a bloody revolution.
Well, thanks for that, Peter. And, thanks obviously to the kind of work that you're able to do, both as a journalist and as a writer, to help us refine our understanding of South Africa and the great complexities that do exist both in the political and economic complex. Appreciate you. Pieter Du Toit is News 24's assistant editor, and this is one of his latest offerings, the ANC Billionaires, Big Capital's Gambit, and the Rise of the Few.